What would you do if the entire world suddenly stopped moving, not slowed down, not paused on your phone screen, but literally frozen? Every person, every car, every bird in the sky, and for exactly 2 minutes, you were the only person left moving. This happened on a perfectly normal Tuesday at 11:17 a.m., and the strangest part wasn't that time stopped. The strangest part was that something else was still moving. Daniel Hayes never believed in strange things. He believed in routines. Wake up at 7 once, coffee at 7:10, train at 7:45, work by 8:30. His life was predictable, comfortably predictable. That Tuesday morning looked exactly the same as every other day. The city was alive with its usual chaos, cars honking, people rushing across streets, phones ringing, construction drills echoing between buildings. Daniel stood on a crowded sidewalk waiting for the pedestrian light to change. He checked his watch. 11:16 a.m. Just another normal moment in an ordinary life. Then everything stopped. At first, Daniel thought he imagined it, because the world didn't fade out gradually. It ended instantly. 1 second the city was roaring with noise. The next second, complete silence. Not quiet, silence. The kind of silence so deep it feels unnatural. Daniel looked up. The traffic light had just turned green, but the cars weren't moving. The people in the crosswalk weren't moving either. A woman stepping forward was frozen mid-step. Her hair hung in the air as if gravity had forgotten it existed. A pigeon above the street remained suspended in mid-flight, its wings frozen. Daniel blinked. What? He waved his hand in front of a man standing beside him. No reaction, no blinking, no breathing. The man looked like a statue. Daniel slowly stepped into the street. Every person was frozen exactly where they stood. Drivers gripping steering wheels, cyclists balanced on bikes, someone laughing with their mouth still open. The entire city had become a photograph, and Daniel was the only person still alive inside it. His first thought was shock, his second thought was fear, but the third thought was the most terrifying of all. What if time stopped for everyone else? But not for me. Daniel walked down the street cautiously. The frozen pigeon above him never moved. A drop of water from a leaking pipe hung motionless in the air. He reached out and touched it. The drop broke apart and fell normally. Gravity still worked. Time still worked, just not for the world. Daniel checked his watch again. 11:17 a.m. The second hand was still ticking. So why wasn't the world moving? Daniel turned a corner and stepped into a larger avenue. Hundreds of people filled the sidewalks, all frozen, all silent. The sight felt unreal. Then something moved. At first he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he saw it again, across the street. Something shifted behind a parked car. Daniel froze, because if something else was moving, then he wasn't alone. The figure slowly stepped out from behind the car. A man. Tall, wearing a dark coat, and unlike everyone else in the city. He was walking. Daniel's heart began pounding. The stranger looked around calmly, almost curiously, like someone exploring a museum. Then he noticed Daniel. Their eyes met across the frozen street. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, the stranger smiled slightly. "Well," he said. "That's unexpected." Daniel swallowed. You can move too?" The stranger nodded. "Yes." He glanced around at the frozen city. "But you weren't supposed to." The stranger walked closer. His movements were slow and deliberate. "Who are you?" Daniel asked. The man ignored the question. Instead, he studied Daniel carefully. "Interesting," he murmured. "Very interesting." Daniel stepped back. "What's happening? Why is everyone frozen?" The stranger looked up at the motionless sky. "Time hasn't stopped," he said. "Only human perception of time has." Daniel stared at him. "That makes no sense." The stranger smiled again. "It will." The stranger pointed toward Daniel's watch. "Look carefully." Daniel glanced down. 11:18 a.m. Exactly 1 minute had passed. "What about it?" Daniel asked. The stranger spoke quietly. "You have 2 minutes." 2 minutes for what? The stranger looked around the frozen city again. To decide something very important. Daniel's stomach tightened. What decision? The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. "You see, this moment is actually a test." Daniel frowned. "A test for what?" The stranger stepped closer. "For humanity." Daniel laughed nervously. "You're joking." "No." The stranger's voice was calm. "Your species is approaching a point of development where certain observations become necessary." Daniel shook his head. "You're saying the world froze because of an experiment?" "Not the world," the stranger corrected. "Only the people." Daniel felt dizzy. "Why?" The stranger finally gave a direct answer. "To see how someone reacts when they realize they are no longer bound by everyone else's time." Daniel stared at the frozen city. Cars, people, birds, everything silent. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked quietly. The stranger looked directly into his eyes. "That's exactly what we want to know." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "We?" The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he said something else. "Every civilization eventually reaches a moment where its future depends on a simple question." "What question?" The stranger pointed toward the silent world. "If time stopped for everyone except you, what would you do?" Daniel looked around again. He could do anything. Take money, move objects, change things. No one would ever know. The thought felt both exciting and terrifying. Then Daniel asked a different question. "What happens when the 2 minutes end?" The stranger's expression became serious. "Time resumes." "And you?" "I leave." Daniel swallowed. "And me?" The stranger studied him carefully. "That depends on your decision." Daniel stood in the middle of the silent street, the weight of the stranger's words echoing in his mind. 2 minutes. That was all the time he had. He walked toward a nearby car whose driver was frozen with both hands on the steering wheel. Daniel tapped on the window. Nothing. No movement. No reaction. The driver's eyes were locked forward as if reality had turned him into a sculpture. Daniel opened the car door. It creaked normally. Inside, the radio display showed 11:17 a.m., the same moment the entire world had stopped. Daniel waved his hand in front of the driver's face. Still nothing. He gently pushed the man's shoulder. The body moved slightly, but the man didn't react. It was like moving a mannequin. Daniel stepped back, unsettled. "Are they conscious?" he asked the stranger. The man in the dark coat stood calmly on the sidewalk. "No," he replied. "To them, this moment doesn't exist." Daniel looked around. "So the entire world is just paused?" "Yes." The stranger folded his hands behind his back. "But you aren't." Daniel walked toward a nearby store window. Inside the glass display sat expensive watches, thousands of dollars in value. He reached for the door. Unlocked. He stepped inside. The cashier stood frozen behind the counter, mid-blink. Daniel walked toward the display case. His heart began beating faster. No alarms, no cameras moving, no witnesses. He could take anything. He slowly picked up one of the watches. Heavy, beautiful, the kind of thing he could never afford. He imagined walking away with it, selling it, changing his life instantly. Then he looked back toward the street. The stranger was watching him, not judging, just observing. Daniel placed the watch back down. He walked out of the store. The stranger nodded slightly. "Interesting." Further down the street, Daniel noticed something else. A bicycle rider was frozen directly in front of a speeding truck. The truck was only inches away. When time resumed, the impact would be instant. Daniel walked closer. The cyclist's face was calm, unaware of the disaster about to happen. Daniel turned toward the stranger. "Can I move him?" The stranger tilted his head. "You can try." Daniel grabbed the bicycle. It moved easily. He dragged the rider and the bike onto the sidewalk. The truck remained frozen in its deadly position. Daniel stepped back. "Now he won't get hit," Daniel said. The stranger watched carefully. "Yes?" he said slowly. "Now he won't." Daniel noticed something strange. High above the city, several tiny lights appeared in the sky. At first they looked like distant stars, but stars didn't appear during daylight. "What are those?" Daniel asked. The stranger glanced upward. "Observers." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Observers?" "Yes." The stranger spoke calmly. "They watch these tests very carefully." Daniel's voice dropped. "You mean aliens?" The stranger smiled slightly. "If that word helps you understand." Daniel stared at the sky again. "How many times has this happened?" The stranger's answer came quietly. "Many." Daniel crossed his arms. "So this whole thing, freezing time, it's just an experiment?" "Not just an experiment," the stranger corrected. "A measurement." "A measurement of what?" The stranger stepped closer. "Power." Daniel frowned. "What power?" The stranger gestured toward the frozen world. When an intelligent species gains enough technological control, it eventually gains control over time, resources, and reality itself. Daniel shook his head. "I don't understand." The stranger's voice became more serious. "The question is simple." He looked Daniel directly in the eyes. When someone is given absolute freedom with no consequences, what do they choose to do? Daniel looked at his watch again. 11:19 a.m. Only seconds remained. He suddenly realized something terrifying. If this was a test, why me? The stranger shrugged slightly. "You were nearby." "That's it?" "Yes." Daniel laughed nervously. "That's the most random selection process I've ever heard." The stranger's expression softened. "Random choices often reveal the most honest results." Daniel looked back at the city. He had taken nothing. He had saved someone's life, but he still didn't know if that was the correct answer. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. The stranger checked Daniel's watch. "Time resumes." "And the test?" The stranger paused, then he said something unexpected. "It continues." The moment Daniel's watch reached 11:20 a.m., the world exploded back into motion. Car engines roared, people shouted, birds flew, the truck sped past the cyclist's former position. The cyclist, now safely on the sidewalk, blinked in confusion. "What the—" The city returned to life exactly where it had stopped. Except for one thing. The stranger was gone. Daniel spun around. No sign of him anywhere. It was like he had never existed. That night, Daniel sat alone in his apartment. He replayed the event again and again in his mind. Had it really happened, or was it some kind of hallucination? Then his phone buzzed. A notification appeared. Unknown sender. One message. Daniel opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "Observation complete." His heart began pounding. Then another message appeared. Result, inconclusive. Daniel whispered to himself. Inconclusive? A final message appeared, and this one changed everything. Subject shows potential. Daniel looked around his apartment. Something felt different. He walked to the kitchen and picked up a glass of water. As he lifted it, everything froze again. The water stopped mid-pour. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. The city outside the window became silent. Daniel's breathing slowed. He turned toward the living room, and there, standing calmly beside the couch, was the stranger. The stranger smiled. "You adapted quickly." Daniel felt a cold wave of realization spread through his mind. "You didn't freeze the world," he said slowly. "No. You stepped outside time." The stranger nodded. "And now?" Daniel looked at his unmoving surroundings, the silent world, the paused universe. "You're saying I can do it too." The stranger's smile widened. "Yes." Daniel stared at the frozen city outside his window. "Why?" The stranger's answer was simple. "Because the test wasn't about humanity." He paused. "It was about you." Daniel felt the weight of those words sink in. "What happens now?" The stranger walked toward the window. "The same thing that happens to every species when someone learns to leave time behind." Daniel swallowed. "And what's that?" The stranger looked back at him. "You decide what comes next." And for the first time since the experiment began, Daniel realized something terrifying. Time wasn't stopping anymore. He was the one stopping it.